Barbara retired at 65 with $2,800 per month in total income. Social Security. Small pension. IRA withdrawals. In 2005 that was a comfortable retirement. By 2025 the same $2,800 per month. Bought approximately 55% of what it bought when she retired. Barbara's income hadn't changed. Her life had gotten 45% more expensive. Without anyone raising her bills. Without any single dramatic event. Just inflation. Doing what inflation does. Quietly. Consistently. Every year. For 20 years. In this video I'm going to show you 3 things. First, how inflation affects retirees on fixed income differently from working people. And why the standard inflation numbers understate what most retirees actually experience. Second, the assets that protect purchasing power over time. And the ones that quietly surrender it. Third, the practical approach most financially resilient retirees use to maintain purchasing power across a 20 to 30-year retirement. But here's the warning. The first one contains a number that most people find genuinely alarming when they calculate it for their own situation. Stay with me through all 3. Before I show you how inflation affects retirees differently, I need to explain something about how inflation is measured. That changes how most people understand their own retirement risk. The standard inflation measure most people hear about, the Consumer Price Index, tracks a broad basket of goods and services for the average American consumer. But the average American consumer is not a retiree. The average American consumer spends more on housing as a percentage of income, more on transportation, more on entertainment. Retirees spend more on healthcare, significantly more, as a percentage of their total spending. Healthcare inflation has historically run faster than general inflation, often significantly faster. The Bureau of Labor Statistics produces a separate index, specifically for older Americans, called the CPIE. It consistently shows higher inflation for this demographic than the standard measure. Here's what this means in practice. When you hear that inflation was 3% last year, your personal inflation rate as a retiree may have been meaningfully higher, because the things you spend money on are inflating faster than the average. Barbara's $2,800 in 2005 required approximately $5,100 in 2025 to buy the same things. Not because of dramatic economic events, because of 20 years of steady inflation, compounding quietly against a fixed income. Here's the twist that most retirement planning misses. Working people have a natural inflation hedge. Their income typically rises over time through raises, promotions, job changes. Retirees on fixed income have no such mechanism. Their income is largely static, while their expenses keep rising. Every year of retirement, the gap between what their income covers and what their life costs quietly widens. Now the assets that protect against inflation, and the ones that quietly surrender to it. Because not all retirement assets respond to inflation the same way. And the mix you hold determines how much purchasing power you retain over a 20 to 30-year retirement. Assets that historically lose to inflation over time, cash and cash equivalents in low-yield accounts. If your savings account pays 1% and inflation runs at 3%, you're losing 2% of purchasing power every year. Fixed annuities without inflation adjustment. Paying the same dollar amount for 20 years, while that dollar buys less every year. Long-term bonds at fixed rates. Particularly vulnerable when inflation rises unexpectedly. Assets that historically protect against inflation. Equities. Stocks in diversified portfolios have historically outpaced inflation over long time periods. This is why remaining invested in equities through retirement, rather than moving entirely to fixed income, is a strategy many financial planners recommend for at least a portion of retirement assets. Treasury inflation-protected securities. Tips. Government bonds explicitly indexed to inflation. Real estate, including REITs. Property values and rents have historically tracked inflation reasonably well. Social Security with COLA adjustments. The annual cost of living adjustment provides some inflation protection, although it doesn't fully capture healthcare inflation for most retirees. Here's the most important twist. The instinct to move entirely to save fixed income at retirement feels prudent. But over a 20 to 30-year retirement, it can be one of the most inflation-damaging decisions a retiree makes. The very safety of fixed income exposes retirees to the slow but compounding risk of inflation. Now the practical approach most financially resilient retirees use. Because maintaining purchasing power over a 25-year retirement requires a deliberate strategy, not just the instinct to be conservative. The three-bucket approach, used by many financial planners as a framework for inflation-aware retirement income. Bucket 1. Short-term income. 1 to 3 years of expenses. Cash and cash equivalents. Covers near-term needs without requiring asset sales during market downturns. Bucket 2. Medium-term income. 4 to 10 years of expenses. Bonds. Dividend-paying stocks. More conservative investments. Refills Bucket 1 over time. Bucket 3. Long-term growth. Everything else. Diversified equities. Growth-oriented assets, designed to outpace inflation over the long term. Refills Bucket 2 over time. The key insight is that different portions of the portfolio serve different time horizons. The long-term bucket has time to recover from market downturns, without the retiree needing to sell at depressed prices. Here's the most important twist. Barbara didn't need to experience 45% purchasing power erosion. A portion of her portfolio maintained in growth assets would have significantly reduced that erosion. Over 20 years, the instinct for safety, without accounting for inflation, is not actually safe. Over a long enough time horizon, Barbara's $2,800 bought 45% less after 20 years. Not because of dramatic failure. Because of inflation doing what it does. Quietly. Consistently. Every year. Against a fixed income. This video just opened a window for you. You've seen how inflation affects retirees differently. The assets that protect and the assets that don't. And the practical approach most resilient retirees use. What you do with that window is completely yours. Because everyone's situation is different. One question before you go. Have you ever calculated what your retirement income will buy in 20 years at 3% annual inflation? Drop it in the comments. Most people haven't. Next week. Why groceries feel more expensive, even when official inflation numbers fall. The gap between headline inflation and what people actually experience at the register is real. It's documented. And it's not going away. Subscribe. Hit the bell. Because that video explains something millions of people feel, but can't fully articulate. See you next week. Educational content only. Not financial advice. Always consult a qualified financial advisor.